has confirmed it's launched an attack on Iran.
Then more. Within minutes, military. Then more. Within minutes, military tracking systems were lighting up with what looked like a coordinated wave of launches moving across the region. According to early reports circulating through defense channels and online monitoring groups, more than 100 projectiles had been detected heading toward one of the most advanced warships ever built, the United States Navy's nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald R. At first, no one knew if the signals were real, a malfunction, or part of a massive electronic deception. But as satellites began detecting heat signatures rising from multiple launch sites, the picture became harder to ignore. Ballistic trajectories arcing high above the atmosphere, low-flying objects skimming across the sea surface. Analysts watching the feeds began whispering the same word: saturation. For years, military planners had warned about this exact scenario. Instead of a single missile strike, a coordinated barrage designed to overwhelm even the most advanced defenses. Ballistic missiles descending at extreme speeds, cruise missiles weaving unpredictably, drones approaching from unexpected angles. If true, it would represent one of the largest missile engagements involving a modern carrier strike group in history. The Gerald R. is not an ordinary ship. Surrounded by guided missile destroyers, advanced radar systems, electronic warfare platforms, and layers of interceptor missiles, it forms the center of one of the most complex defensive networks ever deployed at sea. In theory, the system is designed to detect, track, and neutralize threats long before they can reach their target. But theory and reality do not always align when dozens of threats appear at once. Witnesses at regional bases reportedly described the sky filling with the bright streaks of interceptor launches, creating crossing trails of smoke as defensive missiles raced upward. Some analysts later compared the visual patterns to a storm of white lines crisscrossing the atmosphere, each line representing a split-second decision, a calculation, a race between incoming warheads and defensive interceptors. Meanwhile, unconfirmed reports began spreading across social media, claiming that the United States had already launched counterstrikes against multiple launch facilities believed to be connected to the attack. Some posts mentioned 14 separate sites. Others suggested command centers and storage depots had been targeted. Official statements, however, remained carefully worded, neither confirming nor denying the scale of any response. Behind the headlines lies a deeper story. Tensions between Iran and the United States have been building for weeks. Naval deployments increased. Intelligence flights intensified. Satellite imagery showed unusual activity near several missile complexes. Analysts warned that the region was entering one of its most fragile moments in years. But what actually happened that night? Were the missiles real? Were they intercepted? Was this a demonstration of modern missile defense? Or a warning of how quickly a regional crisis could spiral into something far larger? In this video, we examine the reports, the technology, the strategy, and the unanswered questions surrounding the alleged missile barrage aimed at the USS Gerald R. Because in modern warfare, the battle is not fought only with weapons, but also with information. And sometimes the most important story is the one hidden behind the first wave of headlines. Just before dawn, when the horizon over the Middle East was still dark and quiet, a series of faint signals began appearing on long-range radar networks monitoring the region. At first, the contacts were barely noticeable, brief spikes that could easily have been atmospheric interference or civilian aircraft reflections. But within minutes, the pattern began to change. Multiple tracking stations, including naval radar platforms operating hundreds of kilometers apart, started reporting objects rising from several points along the northern coast of the Persian Gulf. Analysts watching the feeds noticed something unusual. The launches were happening almost simultaneously. Initial tracking data suggested that the objects were traveling at extremely high speeds and climbing rapidly into the upper atmosphere, characteristics consistent with short and medium-range ballistic missiles. Satellite early warning systems soon detected several infrared flashes corresponding with the launch signatures. Within the next 2 minutes, more signals appeared. What began as a handful of tracks quickly multiplied into dozens. According to preliminary estimates circulating among regional monitoring centers, more than 100 airborne objects had been detected moving in roughly the same general direction. Their projected path raised immediate concern. The trajectory calculations pointed toward a location in the eastern Mediterranean where the United States Navy's carrier strike group centered around the USS Gerald R. had been operating for several days. The Gerald R. Ford, the lead ship of the newest class of American aircraft carriers, is one of the most technologically advanced warships ever constructed. Displacing over 100,000 tons and powered by 2 nuclear reactors, the ship carries dozens of aircraft and is protected by an extensive network of escort vessels equipped with advanced radar and missile defense systems. For weeks prior to the incident, regional tensions had been rising. The United States had increased its naval presence following a series of confrontations involving drone activity, missile tests, and maritime security incidents. Iranian military officials had publicly emphasized their growing missile capabilities, including systems designed to challenge large naval formations. During several televised military exercises earlier that year, Iranian forces demonstrated coordinated missile launches from underground facilities and mobile launch platforms. While such demonstrations are common in military signaling, analysts had noted that some of the tactics appeared designed specifically to simulate large-scale saturation attacks. As radar contacts continued to multiply, naval operators aboard American and Allied ships began shifting from routine monitoring to full defensive alert. Combat information centers reportedly initiated threat verification procedures, comparing radar tracks with satellite data and electronic signals intelligence. Some of the detected objects appeared to follow the steep arc typical of ballistic missiles, while others seemed to be traveling much lower, suggesting the possible presence of cruise missiles or long-range drones moving close to the surface of the sea. Within the first 5 minutes of detection, the situation had escalated from an uncertain anomaly to what appeared to be a coordinated strike pattern. The clustering of launch points suggested that several different launch zones had been activated nearly simultaneously. One regional defense analyst later described the radar image as a widening fan of trajectories spreading across the sky. While official numbers were not immediately confirmed, internal estimates reportedly ranged between 80 and 120 separate projectiles. Adding to the uncertainty, electronic warfare monitoring stations began detecting unusual bursts of radio frequency activity across several military communication bands. Some specialists suggested this could indicate attempts to disrupt tracking systems or confuse defensive networks. Others believed the signals might simply be the result of overlapping military communications triggered by the sudden alert. Meanwhile, satellite imagery analysts reviewing real-time feeds reported faint thermal traces near multiple suspected missile storage areas that had previously appeared inactive. Though these observations were preliminary and difficult to verify in the moment, they contributed to the growing belief that the launches were not accidental or isolated. As the first confirmed trajectories were calculated, the estimated time to potential interception zones began counting down rapidly. In modern missile engagements, the window between detection and impact can be measured in minutes. For the crews aboard the ships surrounding the Gerald R. those minutes would determine whether the approaching wave of objects represented a genuine attack or the opening move in one of the most complex military confrontations the region had seen in years. As the radar tracks multiplied and the situation shifted from uncertainty to active threat assessment, analysts began reconstructing the structure of the incoming strike. The pattern suggested that the attack had not been launched as a single wave, but as a layered operation designed to complicate detection and overwhelm defensive systems. Military doctrine in several countries, including Iran, has long emphasized the concept of saturation strikes, using different types of weapons launched nearly simultaneously so that defensive networks must track and intercept dozens of targets at once. The first objects detected appeared to follow steep ballistic trajectories. Ballistic missiles typically rise high above the atmosphere before descending toward their targets at extremely high speeds, sometimes exceeding several kilometers per second during the final phase. Radar data indicated that many of the objects had climbed to altitudes above 100 kilometers before beginning their descent arcs. Such flight profiles are consistent with medium-range ballistic missiles that rely on gravity and velocity during their terminal phase, making them difficult to intercept once they begin re-entry. But the radar picture soon became more complicated. Lower on the screens, operators began detecting additional contacts traveling at far lower altitudes. These objects were moving horizontally across the surface of the sea, maintaining relatively steady speeds and occasionally adjusting their course. Analysts immediately suspected cruise missiles, or long-range unmanned aerial vehicles. Unlike ballistic missiles, cruise missiles rely on jet engines and aerodynamic lift, allowing them to fly just tens of meters above the water. This low altitude makes them harder to detect because radar waves can be partially blocked by the curvature of the Earth and surface reflections. According to reconstructed timelines from defense observers, the launch sequence may have involved 3 separate phases. The first phase likely consisted of ballistic missiles intended to force early activation of defensive radar and interceptor systems. The second phase appeared to involve cruise missiles approaching from slightly different bearings, forcing defensive ships to divide their attention across multiple directions. The final phase may have included slower drones designed to complicate identification and create additional radar clutter. Some analysts later suggested that the missiles were launched from a combination of fixed underground facilities and mobile transporter erector launchers, vehicles that can move along roads or concealed launch corridors. Iran has previously displayed such systems during military exercises, including missile launches from hardened tunnels, sometimes referred to in media reports as missile cities. These facilities are believed to store and prepare missiles in protected environments before moving them to firing positions. In the reconstructed scenario, dozens of ballistic missiles were launched within a window of less than 4 minutes, an unusually tight sequence for such systems. Satellite monitoring groups claim to have detected at least 3 distinct launch zones, separated by several hundred kilometers. This distribution would make it more difficult for defensive forces to predict the exact trajectories and potential impact zones. Meanwhile, the lower altitude objects appeared to follow routes that took advantage of geographic features and maritime traffic corridors. Some of the tracks briefly disappeared from radar before reappearing again closer to the carrier strike group. One naval observer later speculated that certain missiles may have used terrain-following navigation or brief signal masking to reduce detection time. Adding another layer of complexity, a small number of the ballistic trajectories appeared to alter their course slightly during descent. While most ballistic missiles follow predictable paths, some modern systems incorporate maneuverable re-entry vehicles that can adjust their direction during the final phase of flight. Although the degree of maneuverability is often limited, even small course changes can complicate interception calculations. By the time the full scope of the attack pattern began to emerge, the radar picture resembled a dense web of moving tracks converging toward the same general area. Some projections indicated that the first ballistic re-entry vehicles could reach the outer defensive perimeter of the carrier group in less than 10 minutes from launch. Cruise missiles, traveling slower but harder to detect, were expected to arrive slightly later, potentially just minutes after the first interceptions began. What made the situation particularly tense was the uncertainty surrounding the exact number of incoming threats. Early estimates ranged widely, and some tracks appeared to merge or split as radar systems refined their calculations. In high-intensity engagements, even small errors in identification can lead to confusion. For the crews monitoring the incoming wave, the challenge was not only to detect each object, but to determine which ones posed the most immediate danger, and to do so before the window for defensive action closed. By the time the incoming trajectories had been confirmed as potential threats, the defensive network surrounding the carrier strike group had already shifted into combat mode. Modern carrier groups are built around layered defense systems designed to detect and intercept threats at multiple distances. The USS Gerald R Ford itself is protected not only by its onboard sensors and weapons, but by several escort ships, typically guided missile destroyers equipped with the Aegis combat system. These vessels use powerful phased array radar arrays capable of tracking hundreds of objects simultaneously, feeding targeting data into an integrated network shared among all ships in the formation. As the threat picture became clearer, targeting data began moving through that network in fractions of a second. The Aegis system automatically classified objects based on speed, altitude, and trajectory, helping operators determine which threats required immediate interception. Some incoming tracks were assigned to long-range interceptor missiles designed to destroy ballistic targets outside the atmosphere. Others were designated for intercept during their terminal phase, when they would descend toward the fleet. Within moments, the first interceptor launches reportedly began. Vertical launch systems on escort destroyers can fire missiles in rapid succession, each one guided by radar updates transmitted continuously after launch. Observers monitoring regional military communications later described bursts of defensive launches occurring in clusters as ships attempted to engage multiple targets simultaneously. Each interceptor follows a calculated path designed to collide with or detonate near the incoming object, relying on extreme precision to neutralize a threat traveling at several times the speed of sound. Defensive coordination in such scenarios is critical. Ships in the strike group do not act independently. Instead, they operate as nodes in a distributed combat network. One vessel may detect the target, another may provide tracking updates, and a third may launch the interceptor. This cooperative engagement capability allows defensive missiles to be fired from ships that may not have detected the threat themselves, but receive targeting information from another radar platform in the network. At the same time, shorter-range defensive systems were also being prepared. As incoming objects approached the outer defensive perimeter, additional interceptors designed for lower altitudes were readied. Electronic warfare systems began transmitting signals intended to disrupt guidance systems that might rely on radar or satellite navigation. Aircraft aboard the carrier were reportedly placed on alert, though in such situations aircraft are usually kept clear of the immediate engagement zone to avoid interference with defensive missiles. Satellite imagery analysts later reported detecting multiple heat signatures consistent with mid-air detonations during the engagement window. While these observations alone cannot confirm successful interceptions, they often correspond with defensive missiles destroying incoming warheads at high altitude. Some defense observers claim that several intercepts occurred within seconds of one another, indicating that multiple ships were engaging targets at the same time. But interception is only one part of the equation in modern military doctrine. Equally important is the concept of rapid counterstrike. Once the origin points of hostile launches are identified, pre-planned response options can be activated. These responses are often designed in advance, through detailed targeting packages developed using intelligence data, satellite imagery, and surveillance flights conducted over long periods. In the hours following the reported engagement, multiple monitoring groups began tracking unusual air and naval activity across the region. Long-range aircraft reportedly altered their flight paths, while several military satellites shifted observation patterns to focus on suspected launch zones. Although official confirmation remained limited, various defense analysts suggested that precision strikes may have been carried out against infrastructure believed to be connected to the earlier launches. Modern precision strike systems allow targets to be engaged with remarkable accuracy. Cruise missiles launched from ships or submarines can travel hundreds of kilometers while navigating complex routes before striking their designated coordinates. In many cases, these weapons rely on a combination of satellite guidance, terrain mapping, and onboard sensors to ensure accuracy. Some reports suggested that storage depots, command nodes, and mobile launch support areas were among the possible targets selected during the response phase. The number 14 began circulating widely in media speculation, referring to a group of facilities that may have been damaged or disabled during retaliatory strikes. However, without official confirmation, these figures remained difficult to verify. Governments involved in such situations often release only limited information, partly to avoid revealing operational details and partly to prevent further escalation through public statements. Behind the immediate military exchanges lies a broader strategic context that had been building for weeks. The presence of the Gerald R. Ford carrier strike group in nearby waters had already attracted significant attention. Carrier deployments are often used as signals of military readiness, projecting both defensive capability and political resolve. The Ford itself represents the newest generation of U.S. carriers, incorporating advanced radar systems, electromagnetic aircraft launch technology, and improved energy capacity to support modern electronic warfare systems. At the same time, Iran has invested heavily in developing what military analysts describe as asymmetric capabilities, systems designed to challenge larger conventional forces through unconventional tactics. Rather than attempting to match the United States in traditional naval power, Iranian strategy has often emphasized missiles, drones, and fast-moving naval units that can operate in confined regional waters. These tools are intended to complicate the operations of larger fleets and create uncertainty during potential confrontations. Regional intelligence agencies had reportedly been observing unusual activity even before the events described earlier. Increased logistical movement near several military installations, temporary flight restrictions over certain areas, and shifts in naval patrol patterns were all noted by analysts monitoring open-source data. While none of these indicators alone confirmed an imminent attack, together they suggested that tensions were approaching a critical threshold. Diplomatic channels also remained active during this period. Despite public statements emphasizing strength and deterrence, governments often maintain quiet communication lines during crises in order to prevent misunderstandings from escalating into broader conflict. Such channels can include indirect messages passed through regional intermediaries, military-to-military hotlines, or behind-the-scenes diplomatic contacts. The events surrounding the reported missile engagement illustrate how quickly modern confrontations can unfold. Advanced detection systems can identify launches within seconds, but the window for decision-making remains extremely narrow. Commanders must interpret incomplete information, evaluate the credibility of threats, and authorize defensive actions in a matter of minutes. At the same time, political leaders must consider how any response will be interpreted internationally, and whether it could trigger a wider escalation. Even after the immediate exchange appeared to end, uncertainty continued to dominate the information environment. Competing narratives emerged across international media and online platforms, each presenting different interpretations of what had occurred. Some accounts emphasized the effectiveness of missile defense systems, while others questioned whether all incoming threats had truly been intercepted. What remained clear, however, was that the confrontation demonstrated the fragile balance that exists in regions where advanced military systems operate in close proximity. The combination of long-range missiles, high-speed decision cycles, and complex defensive networks creates a situation in which small miscalculations can rapidly escalate into larger crises. For military planners and political leaders alike, the event served as another reminder that in the age of precision weapons and real-time surveillance, the margin for error has become extremely small. In the hours and days that followed the confrontation, the battle for information quickly became almost as intense as the military engagement itself. In modern conflicts, the first version of events rarely comes from official sources. Instead, fragments of data appear across satellite monitoring accounts, maritime tracking services, defense analysts on social media, and regional news outlets. Within minutes of the incident, competing narratives were already circulating online. Some claimed that every incoming projectile had been intercepted successfully. Others suggested that several objects had managed to break through the defensive perimeter. Without transparent official confirmation, speculation filled the gaps. Governments on both sides responded cautiously. Public statements used careful language, emphasizing defensive actions and regional stability rather than providing detailed operational information. This approach is common in military crises, partly because revealing precise capabilities, such as interception rates, sensor performance, or strike accuracy, can provide valuable intelligence to potential adversaries. As a result, official briefings often focus on broader strategic messaging rather than specific numbers. Independent analysts attempted to piece together the sequence of events using satellite imagery and infrared detection data.